Hello and welcome to the Human Echoes recap for Better Call Saul Season 2, Episode 7. This one's called Inflatable, and who called it? Who called it? Sort of a little bit me. I called that we weren't 100% gonna see Jimmy McGill become Saul Goodman in this episode, even though they teased it at the end of the last episode. But we kind of did. We saw another piece of the puzzle. I thought that maybe they were gonna, pull some kind of a scam thing where he was gonna pretend to be somebody called Saul Goodman for a little bit and then hop back out of that persona. They didn't go that direction, so I didn't 100% call it. But getting into the review of what actually did happen in the episode, we start off this one with a flashback. And we already know from past stuff we've learned from Chuck that his dad owned a corner drugstore in wherever they grew up in, somewhere in Illinois. I forget the name of the town. He owned this corner drugstore, and we know, according to Chuck, that Jimmy had stolen several $1,000s, and the tens of thousands of dollars, over the years that he worked for him, from his dad. And we flash back to Jimmy's childhood. I love how they do some of these things where they're not subtle at all. There's so many things that it's such an interesting balancing act between just like in your face imagery of here's Richard Nixon on a magazine cover. Clearly we're in the 60s or whatever. And yet so other things they do incredibly subtle. Better Call Saul really walks that line an interesting way. And we get a little bit of that sort of not quite Bleach bypass, but a little bit brighter tone, sort of whiter past look where it's not quite as colorful. And we see young Jimmy McGill taking Playboys from the top of the magazine rack when he's supposed to be sweeping. Already he's doing his thing. He's being a little bit dishonest. But the meat of this scene really happens when a guy walks into the store and talks to his dad and spins him this incredible sob story. And I say incredible, not 100% I'm in awe of this. It's sort of, I'm in awe that you would pack this many things into your sob story involving people getting sick and cars breaking down and running out of money and just... If this guy is to be believed, he's basically got it as bad as Job. Him and Job are right there in the same boat because it all happened to them on the same day. And Jimmy McGill's dad buys it. At least buys it enough to say, I'm willing to help here. And we see Jimmy kind of looking around the counter, looking at what's going on, looking at this transaction taking place. And he knows what's happening. Even 10-year-old or however old he is, Jimmy McGill, knows what's going on. He calls his dad over. He's like, Dad, this guy's scamming you. This guy is taking you for a ride. They all know that you're a softie and that a good story will work on you. Don't do it. And his dad says to him, but what if it's true? Which I think... It's such a great window into what kind of man this is, that he's so... I think that there's a part of him that acknowledges that there might be some truth in what Jimmy's saying, but he's so concerned that he wants to believe. First of all, he wants to believe that people wouldn't be dishonest, like Jimmy is implying that this man is. But more importantly, he's willing to let them be dishonest just in case there's a possibility that they might be being honest. And that's a really noble notion, right? The idea that, okay, if they're lying, that's on them, but I'm going to do what I think is right. And so he goes, the guy asks him for like $5, he gives him 10, and he says, all right, I'm going to go back in the back room, I'm going to get you some spark plugs. This is really just a plot device to get him out of the room, and him and the con man and Jimmy across the counter from each other. Jimmy's watching the counter, and the con man says, hey, you got cigarettes? And Jimmy's like, yeah, we got cigarettes. And the con man pulls out a wad of cash that he obviously had all along. It wasn't the $10 that Jimmy's dad gave him, and says, hey, get me some I don't know, Lucky Strikes or whatever. I don't know what people smoke then or now. But he tells him to get him a pack of cigarettes. And Jimmy does this thing where he lets the money sit there on the counter. And lets it sit there. And the dad's just taking forever to get back. He's like, I'm going to find those spark plugs. And you can tell that he really wants his dad to come back and find that money. He really wants him to see that he was right, to see that this guy is up to no good, who is scamming him. And the guy doesn't, like, get mean about it. He doesn't sort of, say, you better take that money, He doesn't panic or anything. He just sort of looks at him across the counter like, yeah, what are you going to do about it? What would he do about it if he found out? I would just leave. And then he says to Jimmy, he says, there's two types of people in the world. There's sheeps and there's wolves. Which is obviously in that scenario, you're justifying yourself because you're the sheep. But you can tell that Jimmy takes it to heart. Jimmy takes this sheeps and wolves thing and it sticks in his mind somewhere. This isn't just some random scene from his childhood. This is something... There's one of those moments that I think is a formative moment in his life that he couldn't ever shake from his mind. That image of his dad doing the right thing and getting ripped off and having this guy look at him and say, hey, do you want to be a sheep or do you want to be a wolf? And in that moment, after the guy leaves the store, he reaches into the till and he takes the money that the $8 that the guy had given him for the 2 packs of cigarettes and puts it in his pocket. And that is just, from a character standpoint, that's just so interesting because there's so much weird psychology going on there. You can tell, he doesn't hate his dad. He's not trying to hurt his dad. But I think that there's a very real part of him that is angry that his dad is so easily ripped off, that he's so willing to help these other people. And I think there's a rationalization part of his brain that says, listen, if you don't take it, somebody else is going to take it. Why should you let them be the one? You're at least his son. He owes it to you. You can just run through that rabbit trail of it's really okay because he would have lost this money anyway. And that's the beginning. That's Jimmy McGill. And really, I think it's interesting that might be the most directly bad that we've seen Jimmy McGill be. And we see him do that when he's a child. And I think that kind of gives us an insight into this is something that's sort of at his core. First of all, we know that we can tell that he's able to recognize a con. He sees other people conning his dad all the time. So we see how that implants itself in his mind, that he comes to realize how easy it is to tell a lie. And how easy it is to rationalize with yourself that what you're doing is okay. That, hey, I'm just one of the wolves. You're just one of the sheep. This is how it is. And it's such a fascinating thing because you'd think he should side with his dad. He should try to be with his dad. But he doesn't want to be like that. He doesn't want to be taken advantage of. As much as I think he does love his dad, he sort of despises him too. It's just a fascinating dynamic going on in his mind. But anyway, then we cut to present day. And present day Jimmy is wrapping things up with the plot that we had with Mike. Mike had been told, here's your $50,000, go talk to the district attorney, or I don't know if it's a district attorney, the people who are prosecuting the case. Tell him it wasn't Tuco's gun. He actually doesn't tell him it was his gun, which I think is interesting and extra ballsy. Probably some off-screen negotiations happened between Jimmy and Mike, and Jimmy saying, listen, I don't care what he said about you being an ex-cop. They'll nail you to the wall on this one. Don't tell them it was your gun. Just say it wasn't Tuco's gun. And they 100% see through what's going on. The attorney says, did they threaten you or did they pay you off? And Jimmy's like, we're getting out. Yep, we're going. And Mike just kind of sits there and gives him the stink eye for a minute longer. And then he leaves too. And Jimmy goes into an interesting sort of digression about Tuco, which I think is kind of a little bit of plot spackling, caulking, sort of covering up, because you don't want to end up in a situation where Mike doesn't know that Jimmy also knows Tuco. Even if you could rationalize it in your head, I think that would be a problem. That you could get to a point later on where you would think, okay, why hasn't Jimmy told Mike? I mean, he represented him going in there to talk about Tuco. He met Tuco. He should say something. And if we get down a situation later where Mike needs to know that and he doesn't, it's going to be really weird and awkward to explain why he didn't have that conversation. So he has this conversation, and of course does it in his typical Saul Goodman, Jimmy McGill over-explaining way, where I don't think Jimmy knows that Mike got paid off. I think Mike just told him, I want to amend my testimony, because Jimmy's very much like, listen, I wouldn't mess with that guy either. And Mike isn't so much about, Mike doesn't open his mouth. He just says, just take the next elevator. He gets on, and as soon as, which was a great sort of, they have to sit there and wait for 5 minutes for the elevator in a 2-story courthouse, but, movies. But he definitely doesn't know the full extent, I don't think, of what Mike has done. Mike just calls him and says, I want you to do your lawyer thing, help me out, help me navigate these pitfalls. And so he's sort of absolved of whatever might be an issue knowing too much about what Mike has done. And then we see that Jimmy is going to follow through with his I don't want to be here anymore with Davis and Maine. And he calls in Omar and starts having him draft a letter of resignation. And Omar, I like the character of Omar a lot. There's not much to him. There's not like some deep backstory that we have yet anyway. But he just comes across as a good guy who's doing his job, who likes Jimmy, who likes Davis and Maine, who's good at his job. And he, as he's drafting the letter and realizes what Jimmy's saying to him to write down, he's like, what's the issue here? Why are you doing this? And he just says, listen, I'm not happy, and it'll be okay, and I'll walk. And he mentions in, his sort of rationalization, well, I've got my bonus money and I'll be okay. And I love it that Omar is the one that points out to Jimmy, like, no, if you quit before you've been here a year, you don't get to keep that bonus money. Which maybe says something about Jimmy's skills as a lawyer, that if you're a lawyer taking a contract from another lawyer, you really probably should be reading the fine print. And Omar obviously has, or probably knows how things work, more likely. I don't know that he's read Jimmy's contract specifically, but definitely he understands that Jimmy's going to be throwing away a lot of money here. So Jimmy says, whoa, yeah, no, okay. You know what? That was a temporary lapse in judgment. I'm very happy here. Put it back in your pants, Omar. Let's rip that paper up and go about our happy days. And then we get him driving home, and the title of the episode ties in because he sees the Wiggle Man. That's what my kid calls it. I think they're, it's called an inflatable for the title of the episode, but my kid, my 3-year-old loves the Wiggle Man. Every time we drive past the car dealership, go see Wiggle Man, Daddy. See the Wiggle Man? And he sees the Wiggle Man, and it's an interesting image. It almost doesn't 100% work, right? Like, it's just this. We've all seen them. It doesn't really represent anything other than, hey, look at us. We're here. We're a car dealership. We need you to look at us for 5 seconds to see our 5% APR deal on our cars or whatever. But in the way that it's shot, partly because it's a red, white, and blue Wiggle Man, and also partly in the way that it's edited, you really get the sense that for Jimmy, this flapping guy in the parking lot represents freedom. Represents just sort of being like flapping in the wind and doing your own thing and waving around. And so you see him, that shot that we saw at the end of the last episode, he goes and he gets the colorful shirts and he gets the impossibly varied ties and all the weird suits. And he just, he goes balls to the wall with the craziest fashion he can. And I think that this is sort of the birthplace of Saul Goodman's fashion because and it really adds something interesting because there's a part of that that's a costume, right? There's a part of that is him dressing up for his clients and sort of giving them something to look at, right? Giving them flash and whiz and bang because they're all drug dealers and sort of low lives anyway, so they're not expecting the sort of staid gray pinstripe. They're going to be looking for more once we get to him in the Saul Goodman era. But now we understand that also that outfit for Jimmy represents rebellion and him going it on his own. And the edits in this scene are just insane. I mean, as somebody who does some video editing on a day-to-day basis, I just get like heart palpitations watching like 8,000 cuts and sort of like vertical things sliding into each other. I'm just like, it's so much stuff. And just thinking about how many takes they had to do of him putting on different shirts so they can cut all that together into some giant, this amazing montage. And going on forward with, like, he has this moment, which probably was a little bit over the top for this show, but it still really worked when he has the juicer and he's just getting stuff all over the other employees. The guy comes in and makes this announcement about, I shouldn't have to say this in the halls of a law firm full of adults, but somebody's not flushing the toilet. I don't want to know who it is. And Jimmy's like, it was me. I didn't flush the toilet. And at long, like the straw that breaks the camel's back is he goes and gets a pair of bagpipes and plays them in his office. And when the senior partner comes in and says, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm just blowing off steam like you said. You've got your guitar, I've got my bagpipes, it's all good. Could you hear that through the door? Very obviously trying to get himself fired. The manager says to him, calls him into the office, says, all right, I know what you're doing, moron. Fine, you can have your, walking papers. You can have the bonus that you want so much. I could fight you on this, but I'm not going to. And it's kind of fun watching Jimmy do his thing, but it's also a little bit sad because Jimmy gets the spiel from him. I forget which one is the one who does the dressing down here, but he sort of says, okay, here's your pink slip. And he says to him, just now that I fired you, tell me honestly, what could we have done? What is the issue? Why weren't you happy with everything that you gave us? Which is the $1 million question that, the other lawyers are going to be asking, Kim's going to be asking, what is the deal? You had everything. Why couldn't you be happy? And Jimmy kind of gets a regretful look on his face because you can tell he doesn't hate this guy. He doesn't have anything against the law offices in Davis and Maine. He just isn't happy there. And he says, he kind of tries to apologize. He says, listen, it wasn't you. I think you're a good guy. To which, the senior partner responds with, well, I think you're an a-hole, so get out. At which point he gets his petty little revenge and grabs the diet caffeine-free Coke out of Miss Babysitter's hands and throws it in the garbage. And even, there's the moment, the Cocobolo desk, because apparently that's something that belongs to him now somehow, even though it was in their office. Which, that little detail in that scene, I think, really kind of put the nail in the coffin, because that's something specific that he asked for. And the guy says to him, we gave you the Cocobolo desk. Do you see a Cocobolo desk in my office? The guy who's the head of the law firm? Do you see anything that ostentatious? No, you do not. And Jimmy asks him, well, how much did that cost? He says, $7,000. And so Jimmy kind of, again, I think, really not backpedaling. He wants to be out still. But he doesn't want to be a jerk about it. He was doing what he thought he had to do, but he's also not wanting to burn all of his bridges. So he says to the guy, listen, I'll pay for it. I'll pay for the desk. At which point, it doesn't really matter. The guy just, get out. And I think it's interesting. He goes back to his, the nail salon. And not only that, he still has the esteem, which I talked about last week on the Jimmy's was sort of holding on to his former life. I didn't realize how much. I didn't realize that he still had the esteem. Like, that's too far, okay, dude? There's holding on to your former life, and then there's having a crappy car. Like, spend a couple $1,000s of that bonus and get a slightly better vehicle. But whatever. No, he doesn't do that. He's back in his little tiny cubicle behind the nail salon. And he puts together, we seen him drawing this WM symbol, which I was wondering, what is that? What is he doing? And he goes to Kim, who's in her office, and he says to her, hey, I know you got that offer from Schweikart and Copley. I know that you're interested in them. They're going to pay off your debts. They're going to pay off, they're going to put you on partner track. What if you got a better offer? What if you got an offer from me to come and work as a fellow partner with me and build our own practice? And I will use the money, which I guess answer to my own question, why doesn't he buy another car? Because he needs every penny of that to pay off Kim's law debts. He says, I will pay off your debts if you come to work with me. And Kim turns him down. Not in a, how could you ask me to do this kind of way. Not in any sort of dismissive way. She just says, you still can be with me, but we're not going to be partners together. Okay? We're not, because, and she asks him, the reason she says that is because she asks him, if we go and be partners together, how are you going to practice law? Are you going to be by the book and down the line and inside the lines with everything? Or are you going to be the colorful con man Jimmy McGill that I kind of love, but I also can't reconcile with my lawyer side of things? And Jimmy starts in with the spiel about like, oh, no, I'm good. I'm definitely going to be down the line. And to his credit, as a character who's growing throughout this season, he catches himself and he says, no, I'm not actually going to do that, Kim. I've been being a certain type of person for other people for too long. I did it for Chuck. I did it for you. I did it for Davis and Maine. And he says it in a way, he says it's not that it's your fault, but I thought that was what you wanted. And I thought that I had to do that to keep you. And I'm not doing that anymore because I'm miserable. And she understands, but I think that's the reason she can't reconcile. She can't accept him as the sleazebag lawyer, as the guy who's willing to do whatever. And so she says, hey, thanks, for real thanks, but no thanks. We're going to continue being friends and boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever our relationship is here. I mean, she doesn't spell that out explicitly, but it's very clear. She's not dumping him or saying, hey, go jump in a trash fire, lunatic. She's just saying, I can't cross that line with you. I can't go and be colorful with you. But I hope I wish you all the best. And so she goes to the Schweikart and Copley interview. And she's there and she's talking to them and it seems like it's going really well. And there's this great scene where they're talking to her about her past. And they ask her, where did you come from? And she mentions some little tiny town in the border of Kansas and Nebraska that nobody's heard of. And talks about what her prospects there. And she says, I just, I looked around and I saw what my life was going to be. And I realized that wasn't what I wanted. That I wanted, it was great how that scene ends because they ask her, what do you want? What did you want? Why did you, and she just says more. That I want more. And that's how the scene ends. There's a lot of scenes in this episode that feel like episode ending scenes, especially the way they end episodes in Better Call Saul. You don't usually have like a giant cliffhanger. Sometimes you do, and those are fun. But they don't engineer it. We're like, we have to have a bum 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 moment to end. A lot of times there'll be this sort of quiet character moments that'll finish out the show. And so that was several of those moments, but that one in particular felt like, is it over already? And it wasn't over, but it was an interesting close to that scene, because it's one of those things where they're not telling you a lot, but they're telling you enough. They're giving you enough information there to really have an insight into Kim and her drive, because she doesn't want to be stuck. She knows what it's like to be stuck, and that's not where she wants to be. And in Mike's sideline storyline, he's now looking at a house with his daughter-in-law for their, her and the grandkid. It's a big house. It's expensive. Those are the 2 bullet points. And her attitude, she's showing him this, and she's really happy, and she's sort of, you can tell she's kind of nervous. She doesn't want to be too excited. I don't know what her angle is. I think we know that she's said things to him that are not the truth to get him to buy her, to put her into a better place. And he knows that she said things to him that are not the truth. And it's possible that she knows that he knows that she said things to him that are not the truth to get him to this better place. And the other thing that intrigues me about her, because she's sort of a closed box. We don't know. We get insight into people, Kim and Jimmy and Mike, but we don't have much about her other than the few brief scenes that we've seen, and knowing that she's lied to him or fabricated something in her own mind. That's also possible. But we don't know enough about her to know exactly how she sees Mike. She seems to care. She's not just a weird iteration of a gold digger, as far as I can tell. But she also has to know that he doesn't have this kind of money. And yet she's totally comfortable going to him and saying, I need this kind of money, and not asking, where does the money come from? She's totally, it's just, something about that doesn't sit right with me. I don't think she's a bad character, even a bad person, any more than anybody else is bad in the show, for sure. But I don't know why she's not more curious, why she's so willing to take advantage of Mike. I think there's a part of her on some level that blames him, as he blames himself, for her husband's death, and thinks that she's owed. But it's not, again, it's not like she hates him. At least not the way she comes across. She might have some kind of ember of resentment burning down deep in her soul, but it's not a raging fire of hate for Mike, as far as I can tell. And as far as, we know that their relationship stays together. He's still visiting his granddaughter in Breaking Bad, so years, or I don't know exactly what the timeline is, but a little bit down the road, they're still okay. And that doesn't make sense if she's just like, I don't like your... So it's just a fascinating relationship, and Mike in particular knows that the $25,000 that he has left, or thereabouts. I was talking with my wife during the episode about how much Mike exactly has. He gave the $25,000 from the $50,000 back to Nacho, but Nacho had given him $25,000 originally. He probably didn't spend all of that on the hotel, but exactly how much he spent, we can't say. But he doesn't have enough to buy a house, which means he's going to have to keep doing the heavy lifting in the sort of hitman world to afford this. And you see that moment when she hugs him, that his eyes are just sort of tired, that he knows what he's gotten himself into, and he's resigned to it, but he's miserable on some level. He doesn't want to be getting into this, and he knows that he's going to be going down a road that he can't come back from. But he does it because he cares about them. He cares about the family and his granddaughter and his daughter-in-law enough to do what needs to be done. So we get back to Kim. Comes out of the meeting with Schweikart and Copley. They love her. Everything seems to be going fine. There's a part of me that's expecting some shoe to drop with this, but that's not the direction I think the plot is going. They're not tricking her. They're not, as I mentioned last week, there's no logical thing that makes sense unless there's some hidden agenda that we haven't been told about. But from where I'm sitting, the most reasonable assumption is that they legitimately want Kim as a lawyer. Schweikart isn't the only guy in the firm. He has the other two ladies who are, I guess, also partners with him, who interview Kim, and they all like her. And she comes out of that interview, and she goes and she gets a cigarette, which for me is sort of the mirror of Jimmy holding on to the esteem, right? Kim is, I think, supposed to be sort of giving up smoking. I think that she resents the need for the cigarette, but it also she's not throwing the cigarettes out. She still has them when she needs them. And I think also it represents not only the thing that she holds on to, but to a certain extent it represents a connection with Jimmy, because most of the time when we've seen her smoking, it's in that parking garage, it's with him in that wonderful chiaroscuro light painting of stripe across them as they just stand there. Remember that first episode when they were together where they barely said a word to each other, and yet you still had this sort of, okay, these people know each other. You know, she gives him a hit off her cigarette and gives it back, and it's just that one simple moment. And so even from there, you have that seed planted of that cigarette on a certain level represents her connection to Jimmy. And she's having that cigarette, and she pulls out the card that Jimmy had made when he made the pitch to her, which is a really clever card. And she even gets her name first on the law firm, which I thought was pretty cool. He's, willing to, say Wexler and McGill. What a brain fart there. Late in the day, guys. And she tears it apart, and she looks at the torn apart pieces of the business card. And then she makes a decision, and she takes the business card to Jimmy. And he's in the office with his two camera crew guy, which I'm so glad that they're still here. They're here for this one. Of course, very brief appearance in this episode, but I think going to be a bigger appearance in the next episode, because we see in the promo that he's filming some kind of video with them. And he has his thing where he's like, get a dolly. And the guy's like, what kind of dolly do you want? He names off a bunch of kind of dollies. And Jimmy says, I don't get the cheap one, dude. You don't gotta be a dick about it. And that was a great moment too. Kim walks into before that, before we know exactly who he's talking about, she walks in, and he's in there in the nail salon, and the nail salon lady says, he's in a meeting. You've got to wait. Which was great. Oh, and I skipped over one of my most favorite things in this episode, which is a tiny little thing, but I got to mention it because I already mentioned how much I like Omar. Omar helps Jimmy move the Cocobolo desk. I assume he might be getting paid for it, but it's still impressive because it's out of his way. It's a drive. I don't know exactly how far it is from wherever Davison, Maine is to Albuquerque, but there's several discussions that have been made about geography and Jimmy's house being in the middle, and so there's some level of driving involved. And you can tell that part of him is just kind of bummed that Jimmy's going to be gone. Because I think that he's not going to jump on, I don't know for sure. I haven't seen the rest of the episodes, but my impression is that he's probably not going to be there for much more of the show. He's probably not going to jump on board with Jimmy's antics. He is going to miss Jimmy McGill. And so he's kind of there for the last hurrah, helping him move the Cocobolo desk that apparently Jimmy owns now from the office into his tiny, tiny nail salon office. So that was a backtrack. But I just, the chemistry between those two, and really the sort of look of disappointment and a little bit of envy, I think. I believe that he sort of recognizes that Jimmy is following his dream, even though it's in a really, really crappy place, that he's doing what he really wants to do. But you see that in his eyes as he's, saying goodbye. And I said that I don't think he's going to be back. You know what? I'm reversing that. They put this scene in there. It's entirely possible he'll be back, guys. I'm calling it now. Like 60% chance, at least, this guy's going to pop back up in the show as something. I don't know. I want to see him again. But that's irrelevant. Going on, Kim meets up with Jimmy and she pitches him this idea. She says, listen, not partners. I know what you pitched me before. I can't be partners with you. I can't condone your colorful nature. But what if we're in the same office running separate law practices under the same roof? We would be together, we would be working kind of together, but not with each other. And you can tell she's compromising, right? She's trying to find the middle ground there because there's the part of her that loves Jimmy. Not in just a, I love you kind of way, in a romantic way, but she connects with him on a very fundamental level. And yet, she cannot justify who he is at his core, his conniving nature, the fact that he's willing to go through all these schemes and play fast and loose with the law. She's not okay with that, but she's trying to make those two things work together. She's trying to tell herself, well, listen, all I have to do is just give him, we'll be in the same office. It'll be mostly the same, but I won't have to be condoning what he's doing because I can look the other way because it's not my law office, even though we're working off the same office, but it's not my practice. It'll be cool. And that, to me, I don't think that's going to work. Short term, sure. I'm not saying that it's going to crash and fail is the words I'm looking for. Crash and fail immediately. But it really doesn't seem like the kind of thing that's going to work long term because Kim is trying to fit the two pieces of her life together, much like Jimmy was with the cup in the car, right? The symbolic, I'm going to fit Kim in with my Davis and Maine job, and I'm also going to be myself, and it's going to be good. And he couldn't do it. And now Kim is trying to have it the same way. She's trying to have the compromise. She's trying to say, I'm gonna have it both ways, and it does not work that way in this show. Sad to say. But we'll see. We also have some little bits of Mike going and doing some surveillance on the Tuco Salamanca clan in their restaurant, and we see a little bit of that in the promo as well, although nothing definitive. It's interesting. We've got 3 episodes left this season. I guess they're doing another 10-episode season, and I'm glad that they're letting Jimmy grow. And I've said this, and I'll say this for almost any TV show. It bugs me when you have a character make progress and then lose progress, and make progress and lose progress, and make progress and lose progress. That's what just ticked me off eventually about Dexter. Dexter kept being like, I'm going to become a different kind of killer. I'm going to be the same kind of killer. I'm going to let somebody into my life. I'm going to be by myself. Ad nauseum. And so I think that they're smart enough on this show not to do that. But there was a little bit of a reset at the beginning of the season where Jimmy was going to go off and be his own man. And then at the beginning of the season, he says, well, I'll try to make Kim happy. He's got that behind him now. He's going to be doing his own thing. He's going to be with Kim. I'm just excited to see where this growth goes. Do we hear him say the words Saul Goodman in the modern day by the end of the season? I'm going to say maybe. That's a coin toss. Like, it's 53% chance that he says Saul Goodman, like, in the closing moments of the final episode of the season, making us wait another entire year until next February or whenever. But yeah, I think we're getting there. I think Jimmy we have those aspects of his personality coming together, right? We have the colorful suits now in place. We have his fascination with inflatable stuff. We have him off on his own again, free to do what he wants to do. The only question for me is, where does the plot go from here? And I'm excited to see it now, especially because Jimmy's completely in control. He is the master of his own destiny at this point, and we saw a little snippet of him filming some kind of commercial in the next episode. I don't know exactly what that's going to entail, but seeing him do his thing, hopefully completely unrestrained, it's promising. I'm really, really pumped for the rest of the season. As I've said, for all of these episodes, this was not the bad episode, guys. If you're worried about, man, where's the bad episode this season? This one was good too. They're all really good. This continues to be one of the best dramas on television. And I'm pumped to keep watching 3 more episodes. So I'll be tuning into that. You be tuning into this. If you liked it and you're watching the video, like it, leave a comment. You can see all of our other videos. We've got awesome stuff where I'm talking to people that aren't just me and you and the camera. And we do games and things like that. So check that out if you haven't already with the rest of our channel. And I will see you guys next week with another recap of Better Call Saul.